Welcome back. Well, yes, we are now joined by His Excellency, Dr. Kayode Fayemi, Governor of Ekiti State. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the program. Well, the NGF did have their first teleconference on your approach and strategy towards COVID, involving the private sector and several other groups. So we understand that that was to see how you could work seamlessly between NGF, the government's, federal government's committee, and then the private sector moving forward. So, yes, you did come up with some recommendations, but in terms of operationalizing this, because yes, we have lockdown in some states, but there are some questions concerning, should those lockdowns have been in a few states, or should they have been in the entire country? For those experts who think, well, we need a holistic approach such that we don't take any chances. What do you think of that?
Well, good morning, Chamberlain, and thank you for the opportunity of updating Nigerians on what we're doing. Well, you're right. We had our teleconference on Sunday. 30 of my colleagues were present on that teleconference. We also had the privilege of the Honorable Minister of Health and the Director General of the Center for Disease Control joining that teleconference. I think the federal government has done the right thing by focusing on the hotspots, the epicenter-based challenge that we face as a nation. There are all sorts of positions taken by professionals in public health. There are those who go for the extreme as the most effective, and the extreme in this case being a total lockdown on all the 36 states in the country. But I think this may really be out with the reality. So I think it's good that the initial focus is on Lagos, Ogun, and FCT. However, it's absolutely important, and a lot of my colleagues are already taking action, regardless of what the federal government is focusing on, to prevent this disease from getting to their shores. Because the reality, as we all know, is that the bulk of Nigerians who live in Lagos, who live in Abuja, are not necessarily from there. They also have their homestays. They have their villages and towns. And when the shit hits the fan, excuse my French, people will run back home. And you cannot rule out the possibility of such people running back home with the existence of COVID-19 on their bodies already. So I think that's why it's important that my colleagues in almost all the states already have their own institute action plan, and they are focusing on it. They've set up their emergency operations center. They've set up their own isolation center, coordinating with the Center for Disease Control, cutting down on the state. In Ekiti, for example, we're on total lockdown, except for those on essential services. We're already organizing support systems for the weak and the vulnerable in our society. So really, federal government has done what it should do, but we have a responsibility. We have voted into office to protect our citizens. And that's our primary responsibility. And that is what my colleagues are doing in the various states.
Okay, well, we'll still talk about that a bit more, but I'd like to get your own experience. How is the state, your state, handling this? Because a couple of weeks ago, when we spoke to, I think, the head of the NMA in the state, he referenced something about 8 beds or thereabouts in the state. So what is the latest scenario in terms of how you are approaching this?
Well, the person you spoke to is closer to the fact, but not entirely accurate. We have a 10-bed isolation center. We have had calls in the last 3 weeks to use 2 beds in that isolation center, following the incident the index case that we have. But as of today, that index case is fine medically. It has 2 negative tests, and we may have to actually release him, discharge him, alongside the non-positive case that we originally had. However, we are also planning a 100-bed facility in case our situation goes beyond current experience, so that we're ready. Don't forget, in Ekiti State, we started early. We set up a task force on this on the 2nd of March, and we have been on a comprehensive enlightenment and advocacy program of our state for the last 1 month. So if people are conscious of this and have been addressing our population regularly since they started. Our EOC is fully in session. We're working with NCDC very, very well, and we are also limiting our people to essential services. If you do not have to go out, you stay at home. But this is not an isolated problem. We need a joined-up strategy. It's not a case in which I will say, oh, Ekiti is fine, so I don't have to worry about Osun that is next door to me or on those states. We all have to have a coordinated approach, and that is really the importance of a joined-up strategy between the federal government and the state. But so far, so good in Ekiti. We can do with a lot more support, and we are gathering as much support as we can. Our health workers have been fantastic. They're putting in all the best efforts into this, but you cannot have enough assistance as far as this menace is concerned.
Right. When you talk about some form of support system for the most vulnerable in your state, I would like to know, what are you referring to specifically? Are you saying that there will perhaps be some form of stipend or the stimulus package that is being talked about right now? What specifically are you planning for the most vulnerable in your state?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. For the most vulnerable in our state, you may be aware already that Ekiti is one state that supports the elderly. We have a social security scheme for our elderly population, in which we give a 5,000 naira stipend to every elderly person who is over 65 and does not have a means of livelihood or a pension. So we've been doing that for as long as I've been in office, since my first time, and we've started it again during this time. But what we've added to that is what we call Oúnjẹ Arúgbó, and Oúnjẹ Arúgbó has also been in session long before COVID-19. That's food for the elderly. What we have now added as a result of COVID-19 is what we call the reactivation of our food bank, in which we will make food available to not just the elderly, but anyone that is defined within our poverty index as vulnerable or poor. So that is what we're adding in light of what the decision we've taken to lock down the state. We've also said, in addition to that we will look at the possibility of a stipend for those who are going to suffer a loss of income as a result of this lockdown, because we know a sizable portion of our population is daily based. They earn their living, they eke out their living on a daily basis. And once we've locked down the state, that means they don't have any means of livelihood, and we really have a duty and a responsibility to provide for them as well.
Right. So lockdown seems to be the buzzword right now across states, and that has brought about this debate about whether states indeed have the right, or, they have the legal standing to shut their borders. Well, maybe boundaries, the terms keep changing. But from your perspective, is it legal for states to shut their borders? And what kind of advice are you getting from the legal experts in your state?
frankly, that question is a no-brainer. We're talking about the health of people that are within my jurisdiction. I don't think it's, I've seen some debate, both from my friends in the legal profession and from those who believe that we have a health emergency on our hands. And I think I tend to tilt on the side of those who argue that with a health emergency, those who are invested with the authority to govern must do everything to protect their citizens. And in the case of Ekiti State, we've received very comprehensive legal advice. I've issued in the course of this 1 month at least 2 executive orders tied to both the Quarantine Act and the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And an executive order allows us to bypass, if you like, a request from our House of Assembly that has gone unreferred, that is also on lockdown under these circumstances. And we've done that. We believe that what we have done is legal and legitimate and is in the overall interest of the Ekiti people, and our people are in support of it.
Governor Fayemi, one would, to a large extent, we've talked about the health sector, how they are, largely, stretched thin, and many people also say, and of course we all agree, that the economy is hard hit. But there's another sector that's equally hard hit, and definitely the calendar is tumbled now, and that is the education sector, especially the academics of primary and secondary schools in particular. What kind of conversation did that conversation come up in your meeting within the governors forum over the weekend, and what kind of resolutions were taken?
Well, we did not specifically have a discussion on education, but I also know that my colleagues are taking steps on that. Don't forget that we were almost at the end of the time. Schools were almost going on break for the Easter holiday. In fact, in Ekiti, we had just 2 weeks left before we had to shut down schools. And what we've done in place of that, so that the kids at home are not just idle, we started what we call an on-air school in Ekiti yesterday, Monday, and that goes through some of the subjects on the curriculum of our schools, particularly primary schools, because sometimes you really need to hold younger people more than those in secondary schools who are a bit more disciplined and can follow their curriculum and their studies as they prepare for the WAEC examination. But I'm sure you're also aware that the West African Examination Council and NECO had postponed the exams that they had. So such conversations are going on. I know that the school on air is not unique to Ekiti. I believe Lagos State is also doing something similar, and I would not be surprised if my other colleagues are doing the same thing. So education of our children is very important to us, and we are keen to ensure that they don't become overly idle. But don't forget, the parents are also going to be home with them now. So in that lockdown, I would imagine that there is also personal responsibility for parents to ensure that their children don't abdicate their own responsibility to their studies.
So should this continue, Governor Fayemi, what kind of conversation would you, because we all know that it's a unified system with the federal and state governments. It's a national policy, so to speak, a national curriculum that all schools go through. Shouldn't there be a conversation to sustain that program? Because the holiday is just beyond Easter. And once that Easter holiday is done, third term is supposed to resume. And what if this occurrence, this circumstance that we have at this moment extends beyond that? What happens? I'm just wondering if there is a conversation among governors or a thinking that should this go beyond this time, there is a plan.
There will certainly be a conversation. To cite the example of Ekiti, our schools have been shut for a month. 23rd of March to 23rd of April. And we will review the situation as we move along. Even though our schools have been shut for 1 month, our lockdown is for 14 days. So by the time we spend the 14 days on lockdown, the situation should become clearer to us. And I know that my colleagues and I are having another teleconference on Wednesday, and a number of issues will keep coming up that we'll have to address in our conversation with the federal government. I'm aware from what we did last Sunday that the Honorable Minister of Health and our commissioners for health in the state are also going to follow on from us and have a teleconference focusing on steps to be taken to enhance the protection of citizens against the COVID-19 pandemic. So I would not rule out the possibility of the Minister of Education, ourselves, and our commissioners also looking at practical ways of ensuring that we do not lose the opportunity to train our students effectively. But the most important thing, and I believe the federal government is already doing that, is for us to have a joined-up strategy on economic sustainability generally, because that's the area that I think once we focus on health and we're able to manage the health pandemic, the impact of COVID-19 on our economy is far more severe and can cause far more problems. And I'm glad that I heard that the president has now appointed the chairman of the National Economic Council, the vice president, to head the economic sustainability plan. We hope that would involve a joined-up strategy today, because it's one economy. It's not just the federal government economy. It's an economy for the Nigerian nation.
You know, speaking of which, I mean, in the plan and strategy that the NGF has to get across to those who really do need this, I also do remember that the conditional cash transfer, trading, at some point they had challenge gathering data, getting these facilities to the appropriate people. How are the states approaching this, ensuring that they get the right data such that you can then get access to those people who need it? Because we have a huge informal sector here. What's happening with that?
Sorry, Chamberlain, I love the last bit of your question, but
Let me try and put it in again. It had to do with gathering appropriate data such that you can reach out to the people who really need it, so that it doesn't get into the wrong hands, and then at some point in time you see people who are grumbling and complaining, and then the supplies don't get to them. How is the NGF approaching that?
Data is very important, and data is ideally the poverty data of every state should be available in the Ministry of Planning and Budget of the state. We have our own data here. What we find as families that are poor and that are qualified for the conditional cash transfer that you mentioned, which is something available across all the states. Yes, you are right. In the situation where government is providing palliatives, there are those who do not necessarily qualify for the palliatives who would want to take advantage. And in our state, we have a committee that has been set up to undertake this responsibility, and the Commissioner for Budget and Planning is very central to that. A statistician general in the state statistics body is also somebody who is playing a key role. And we have a Bureau of Labor and Employment that deals with issues of our social investments. And some of these things, we already have data gathered over a long period of time. And I can assure you that my colleagues and they have their data. And this is not a partisan data. This is the data that is really focused on who truly is a vulnerable person, who is a poor person, who deserves to be assisted in the course of this lockdown. Everybody deserves to be assisted. The resources of government is limited, and we can't make all these resources available to, and not everybody is poor. For example, we've taken a step in a civil servants received their March salary by the 26th of March. Everybody has been paid because we knew this lockdown was coming, and we wanted to ensure that we at least civil servants, and for every civil servant you have in Ekiti, is probably responsible for at least 4 or 5 other amounts, which is a very, very big data to deal with already.
Governor Fayemi, on a final note, I mean, more than any time, we have seen that health is wealth. And I mean, this pandemic has affected economies all around the world. And Nigeria is not exempted. I see your budget for the year is 124 billion naira budget. And we've seen what's happening to crude oil, meaning federal allocation will be harmed in a major way. And the question is, what is your plan for the coming months? How do you plan to survive these coming months, which will be definitely challenging for your state?
Oh, clearly, these are tough times for all states, including my own states. And what we have done was begin to work our budget, review our budget on a number of scenarios. We've reviewed our budgets on $20 per barrel scenario. We've reviewed it at $25 per barrel scenario. We've reviewed it at $30 per barrel scenario. So we have a sense of what we need to do to cut our coats according to our cloth rather than according to our size. And our focus in that cut is to emphasize the vulnerability of our population. So we would be spending a lot more, placing a lot more priority on recurrent expenditure, ensuring that we struggle to meet our salary payments, we struggle to meet our social investment program. We run a free education program. We run a free health program for the under 5, for pregnant women, for the elderly, and for people with disability in Ekiti State. We would want to keep all those things as much as possible. Our capital project, obviously, we're limiting because it's only when you have kept your population alive that you can think about the infrastructure. But there are some infrastructures that have a bearing on even the sustainability of our economy, and we would review that, how much of a priority we think that they are. Also require support. There's no question about it. Government would have to do more to revisit the federation account. We need to improve on macroeconomic stability. I believe we need fiscal policy measure to safeguard the distribution of oil and gas to the federation account. And I believe we have to bite the bullet and unify the exchange rate in a market determined.
All right, well, what a place to let it go. Because, I mean, some states I've been talking about, do they take or bite the bullet as well and have that conversation about resources, mineral resources in states? Do we do something about it so that states can leverage on the resources they have and then maybe pay tax to the center? Who knows? We'll get back to His Excellency much later. But we've been speaking with His Excellency Kayode Fayemi, Governor of Ekiti State. So we will be back in a moment, and then we've got something else coming up as well. Stay with us.